In the quaint suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek, the sun-drenched streets lined with manicured lawns and white picket fences painted an idyllic picture. Among these homes stood the residence of Sarah Mitchell, a vibrant woman in her late 40s who had poured her heart and soul into her home. Sarah had lived there for over a decade, nurturing her garden filled with blooming roses and hosting family gatherings that echoed laughter through the community. Willow Creek was governed by a homeowners association, HOA, established to maintain property values and promote community spirit. Initially, their guidelines seemed reasonable. They encouraged uniformity in landscaping and ensured that communal spaces were well kept. Sarah had signed off on these terms when she moved in, believing they fostered a sense of belonging. However, as time passed, the HOA board, led by the overbearing Karen Johnson, began to wield their authority with increasing severity. What started as friendly reminders about lawn maintenance quickly escalated into stringent demands. Karen seemed to take pleasure in nitpicking the smallest details, from the shade of paint on Sarah's front door to the height of her hedges. The friendly neighborhood vibe shifted dramatically when the HOA began issuing fines for minor infractions, claiming these rules ensured community standards. As tensions rose between Sarah and the board, she felt her sense of ownership slipping away. It became clear that the HOA's reach extended beyond mere oversight. They were beginning to dictate how she could live in her own home. The conflict simmered beneath the surface, setting the stage for a confrontation that would challenge not only Sarah's rights but also the very foundation of community living in Willow Creek. The tension between Sarah and the HOA reached a boiling point one sunny afternoon when she decided to host a garden party to celebrate her daughter's graduation. Sarah had spent days preparing, pruning her roses, setting up decorative lights, and arranging tables adorned with fresh flowers. Excitement filled the air as friends and family gathered, filling her home with laughter and joy. However, unbeknownst to her, this cheerful event would serve as the catalyst for an unexpected conflict. The day of the party, Karen Johnson showed up unannounced, surveying the scene with a critical eye. She quickly noted that Sarah's festive decorations did not adhere strictly to HOA guidelines regarding color schemes and were potentially obstructing the view for neighboring properties. Without hesitation, Karen confronted Sarah in front of her guests, proclaiming that she was in violation of multiple regulations. Fuming from the embarrassment but attempting to maintain composure, Sarah argued that she was merely celebrating an important family milestone and that her decorations posed no real threat to community standards. Karen dismissed her concerns outright, insisting that enabling any exceptions would lead to chaos within the neighborhood. By the end of the gathering, tentative friendships had been strained by Karen's unwarranted outburst. That very evening, Sarah found an official letter in her mailbox detailing fines for violations incurred during her party, each line dripping with disdain for what they deemed improper conduct. Feeling cornered and frustrated, Sarah decided enough was enough. Fueled by a desire to reclaim her space and assert her rights as a homeowner, she began preparing to defend herself against what she perceived as an all-out assault from the HOA. Unbeknownst to her, this would culminate in a legal confrontation that would set a precedent not only for herself but for other homeowners feeling similarly oppressed. In the wake of Sarah's garden party and the subsequent fines, the HOA board, emboldened by their recent actions, decided to escalate their approach. Karen Johnson convened an emergency meeting with board members to discuss what they perceived as insubordination from Sarah. Fueled by a desire to reinforce their authority, they drafted a formal complaint against her, detailing the alleged violations of HOA rules that included not only the decorations but also the gathering's noise level and parking arrangements. Within days, Sarah received a letter stating that if she did not rectify her so-called infractions within a specified timeframe, the board would take further action. This ominous message was accompanied by a threat to involve legal counsel. The board cited their responsibility to uphold community standards and protect property values, but Sarah felt this was less about the rules and more about exerting control over residents. Karen's interpretation of neighborhood regulations seemed increasingly inflated. She claimed that allowing deviations from established norms would create slippery slopes where chaos could reign in Willow Creek. To Sarah, it appeared as though Karen was wielding her power indiscriminately, interpreting rules in ways that suited her agenda while disregarding their spirit. As tensions mounted, the HOA hired an attorney specializing in real estate law to draft a cease and desist letter addressed to Sarah. The letter demanded immediate compliance with all HOA regulations or face potential litigation. This move shocked Sarah, who had always considered her home a sanctuary where she could express herself freely. Faced with such stark opposition, Sarah felt alone but resolute. She began gathering documents and evidence of her compliance with community guidelines over the years, preparing for what would soon become a battle between individual rights and collective governance. The stakes were rising, and Sarah was determined to fight for her home and her dignity in the face of what felt like an invasion of her personal space. As the weight of the HOA's actions bore down on her, Sarah found herself tangled in a whirlwind of emotions. The joy of celebrating her daughter's graduation had swiftly transformed into a harrowing experience that left her feeling vulnerable in her own home. Once a cherished sanctuary that echoed with laughter and love, her residence now felt more like a battleground, marked by looming threats and an infringement on her personal freedoms. Every time she glanced at the official letters from the HOA, a knot tightened in her stomach. Fear mingled with anger as she grappled with the reality that the very institution meant to uphold community standards was now targeting her. The notion that someone, especially someone like Karen, could dictate how she could live within her own property was infuriating. Sarah wrestled with feelings of injustice. After pouring years of hard work into her home, it felt utterly disheartening to be treated as if she were merely a tenant rather than an owner. In quiet moments, Sarah reflected on what home ownership truly meant to her: autonomy, peace, and the ability to shape her living space without interference. As Karen and the HOA claimed their authority, those fundamental rights felt disturbingly threatened. The brightness of her vibrant garden and the warmth brought by family gatherings were overshadowed by fears of legal repercussions and escalating fines. Determined not to let this situation define her or destroy the joy she found in nurturing her home, Sarah resolved to fight back. Drawing strength from both her memories of happy times spent there and her conviction about property rights, she realized that this battle extended beyond just herself. It symbolized a struggle for all homeowners who dared to assert their independence against overpowering governance. With each passing day, Sarah found renewed determination, ready to defend not only her home but also the essence of what it meant to be a homeowner in Willow Creek. As Sarah prepared for her impending legal battle against the HOA, she delved into the legal implications that underpinned her situation. The foundation of her ownership rested on the rights granted to her as a property owner, outlined in state property laws and reinforced by the terms under which she purchased her home. These laws generally recognize that homeowners have exclusive rights to their property, including the ability to make modifications and personal choices about their living space, as long as those do not violate local zoning laws or endanger public safety. One critical aspect of Sarah's argument was that while HOAs are established to maintain community standards, they cannot infringe upon the fundamental rights of homeowners. The governing documents of most HOAs, including covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CCRs, must be reasonable and clearly defined. Importantly, these regulations should never be used as a tool for harassment or domination over residents. In many jurisdictions, state laws dictate that an HOA must provide fair notice and due process before penalizing a homeowner. Moreover, Sarah learned about the concept of substantive due process, which protects individuals from arbitrary government actions that violate their rights. As a homeowner, she had the right to live free from unreasonable interference, especially when it came to personal celebrations within her own property. As she gathered documentation regarding her previous compliance with HOA regulations and sought out legal advice from an attorney specializing in property law, Sarah felt emboldened by her findings. The legal principles supporting her claim were not just academic, they represented her fight against what she perceived as an overreach of power by the HOA. Armed with knowledge about homeowners' rights and relevant regulations, Sarah was ready to make a stand, not only for herself but also for others who might find themselves facing similar oppressive circumstances within their communities. In the days following the HOA's aggressive actions against Sarah, the residents of Willow Creek began expressing their opinions more openly. The community was divided. While some supported the board's strict enforcement of rules, others were increasingly concerned about the implications of such heavy-handed tactics. At a neighborhood barbecue, whispers circulated among residents. Some, like Tom and Linda, longtime members of the HOA, argued that maintaining order was vital for property values and community standards. If we allow one person to flout the rules, what's next? Tom insisted as he flipped burgers on the grill. Their perspective highlighted a fear of chaos that seemed to resonate with those who valued conformity. However, a growing number of residents began to question whether the board's actions were excessive. Jane, a newer homeowner who had moved in just last year, voiced her discomfort with how Sarah had been treated. "It feels like they're policing our lives," she remarked to a group gathered around her. "We should be able to celebrate milestones without fear of fines or threats." This sentiment echoed among several younger families in attendance, many of whom had experienced similar frustrations over minor infractions. As discussions continued throughout the neighborhood, it became apparent that Sarah's situation was not an isolated incident but rather indicative of larger issues within the HOA governance structure. Conversations turned into debates about transparency and accountability in HOA decision-making processes. Some residents called for a town hall meeting, advocating for changes to how rules were enforced and demanding more resident involvement in decisions that affected their lives. The growing dissent suggested a shift in community dynamics. Homeowners were starting to recognize that they needed to stand together against what they perceived as an overbearing HOA. With whispers turning into discussions, it seemed that Sarah's fight might catalyze a larger movement for reform in Willow Creek, a collective push for balance between neighborhood standards and individual rights. With determination fueling her actions, Sarah decided to address the HOA's intimidating tactics head-on. First, she drafted a carefully worded letter to the board, outlining her concerns regarding their approach and requesting a meeting to discuss the situation. She emphasized her commitment to maintaining community standards while also asserting her rights as a homeowner. Recognizing that open communication could be beneficial, Sarah hoped to foster an atmosphere of negotiation rather than confrontation. After several days of anxious waiting, she received a response from the board, albeit not entirely in the spirit she had hoped for. The letter suggested a meeting but was tinged with defensiveness, reiterating their stance on rule enforcement and dismissing some of her concerns. Nevertheless, undeterred, Sarah prepared for the meeting with detailed documentation of her compliance with HOA guidelines over the years and examples of how other residents celebrated community milestones without backlash. During the meeting, Karen Johnson led the discussion with an air of authority that set a tense tone. Despite this environment, Sarah stood firm, articulating her points clearly about the need for reasonable interpretations of rules and fair treatment for all homeowners. She highlighted that fostering community should include celebrating individual milestones without fear of retribution. While Karen maintained a rigid stance throughout their discussions, other board members appeared swayed by Sarah's passion and logical arguments. Some even raised questions about whether their enforcement tactics were creating more division than cohesion among residents. In light of these reactions, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic. Perhaps dialogue could bridge gaps between frustrated homeowners and the HOA's often unyielding governance. Encouraged by this small glimmer of hope, she recognized that engaging in open communication was not just vital for her situation but also essential for cultivating a stronger sense of community in Willow Creek as a whole. With every interaction, she felt she was standing not only for her rights but for all those who longed for balance within their neighborhood governance. Despite Sarah's efforts to engage the HOA in constructive dialogue, tensions escalated rapidly in the ensuing weeks. At the next board meeting, a large crowd of residents showed up, many rallying behind Sarah's cause. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation as supporters wore buttons that read, "Fairness for Homeowners." The room filled quickly, an unusual turnout that underscored the growing discontent within the community regarding Karen Johnson's heavy-handed tactics. As the meeting commenced, Sarah presented her case to not only defend her rights but to shed light on how the board's actions were affecting everyone. She urged her neighbors to voice their opinions, encouraging them to advocate for transparency and fair treatment instead of punitive measures. Her passion ignited a spirited debate among residents, many of whom had their frustrations over similar encounters with the HOA bubbling to the surface. However, Karen responded sharply to this unexpected show of dissent. With irritation flashing in her eyes, she dismissed concerns as mere complaints rather than legitimate grievances. As confrontations intensified during this public forum, accusations flew back and forth. Some residents accused the board of creating a toxic environment where homeowners feared expressing their individuality. In subsequent weeks, Karen ramped up her defenses by hiring an aggressive attorney who sent out letters threatening legal action against those participating in what they termed disruptive behavior. This tactic only served to heighten tensions further. Many residents felt bullied into silence, fearing retaliation for voicing dissent against board decisions. As public discussions became increasingly charged at neighborhood gatherings and online forums, Sarah found herself at the center of a growing movement against what many viewed as an authoritarian governance style from the HOA. Rallies began forming outside community events where residents discussed proposals for reforming HOA governance structures and ensuring homeowner representation. What started as Sarah's personal struggle began transforming into a collective fight against perceived injustices within Willow Creek's HOA, a confrontation rooted deeply in community values versus authoritative control that threatened their shared sense of home. The battle lines were drawn. It was clear that this would not end quietly. As the situation with the HOA intensified, Sarah realized that she needed more than just community support. She required legal protection to navigate the complex landscape of property rights and HOA regulations. Determined to take a stand, she began by consulting with an attorney specializing in real estate law. During their first meeting, Sarah laid out the timeline of events, providing documentation of her compliance with HOA guidelines and highlighting the aggressive tactics the board employed against her. The attorney listened intently and explained the legal grounds for her case, emphasizing that homeowners have specific rights under state property laws. He outlined potential claims Sarah could make against the HOA for harassment and overreach, reinforcing her belief that she had a strong position. Feeling reassured, Sarah asked about the feasibility of filing a lawsuit if negotiations failed. The attorney discussed options for mediation and litigation, emphasizing the importance of gathering further evidence from other residents who had similar experiences. In parallel, Sarah tapped into the growing movement among her neighbors. She organized a meeting at her home where she invited fellow residents to discuss their grievances with the HOA. Many expressed their fears of retaliation but also shared stories of feeling marginalized by board decisions. Encouraged by Sarah's determination, they began to rally together, forming a coalition aimed at seeking legal advice collectively. With this newfound support, Sarah and her neighbors approached a local attorney who offered to represent them as a group. This arrangement not only helped alleviate individual financial burdens but also strengthened their position as they prepared to confront the HOA. As they strategized, Sarah felt a renewed sense of empowerment. It was no longer just her fight but a unified stand against what they considered unjust governance. Through these steps, consulting legal experts and rallying community support, Sarah was laying a solid foundation for a legal battle that could redefine homeowner rights within Willow Creek and serve as a beacon for others facing similar struggles nationwide. As tensions continued to rise, both Sarah and the HOA recognized the potential consequences of an escalating conflict. In a bid to find common ground, Sarah proposed a mediation session to address the grievances on both sides. She believed that open dialogue could foster understanding and potentially ease hostilities. The proposal caught some board members' attention, especially after witnessing the growing unrest among residents. Karen Johnson, however, remained initially resistant. Yet, faced with increasing pressure from both within the board and the community, she eventually agreed to participate in mediation. The meeting was organized at a local community center, where both parties could present their perspectives in a neutral setting. Sarah prepared thoroughly, bringing along her documentation and testimonials from fellow residents who shared similar frustrations. During the mediation session, Sarah articulated her concerns clearly and calmly, emphasizing the need for a more reasonable interpretation of HOA regulations that allowed for individuality while still maintaining community standards. On the other side, Karen expressed her worries about preserving property values and maintaining order within Willow Creek, insisting that strict adherence to rules was crucial for the neighborhood's integrity. While the session saw some heated exchanges, it also provided moments of reflection. Sarah's coalition of residents shared personal stories that highlighted how the board's tactics had affected their lives. Karen and several board members listened, beginning to see the human impact behind their policies. By the end of the session, they reached a tentative agreement to revise some of the more stringent enforcement practices and establish clearer communication channels between residents and the HOA. While not all issues were resolved, such as the ongoing legal discussions, both sides left with a renewed commitment to work collaboratively rather than adversarially. This mediation marked a significant step toward resolution. It not only allowed Sarah's voice to be heard but also encouraged other residents to join in shaping a more inclusive governance approach in Willow Creek. As tensions eased slightly, there was hope that this would lead to lasting change within their community, a move towards understanding rather than divisions. As the mediation efforts unfolded, Sarah and her union of homeowners decided to take the next step by filing a lawsuit against the HOA. The primary objective was to seek legal clarity on the authority of the HOA and its adherence to state property laws. The case was set to be heard in district court, and anticipation rippled through both Sarah's coalition and the HOA board. During the court proceedings, Sarah's attorney presented evidence of the HOA's aggressive tactics and how they disproportionately impacted individual homeowners' rights. They argued that the board had overstepped its authority by imposing unreasonable fines and regulations that stifled personal freedom, which undermined the very purpose of community living. Supporting testimonies from fellow residents added weight to Sarah's claims, showcasing a pattern of behavior that affected many in Willow Creek. The HOA's defense centered around their mandate to maintain property values and enforce community standards. Karen Johnson and her attorney maintained that their actions were necessary for preserving order within the neighborhood. However, as the proceedings progressed, it became evident that several board members had remained uninformed about resident sentiments and the negative consequences of their stringent policies. After days of presentations, deliberations, and witness accounts, the judge issued a ruling that favored Sarah's coalition. The verdict highlighted that while HOAs have considerable authority in managing community affairs, they must also respect homeowners' rights to autonomy and expression within their properties. The court mandated a review of existing regulations by an independent mediator to ensure they aligned with reasonable standards while allowing for homeowner individuality. In light of this ruling, Karen Johnson announced plans for a reassessment of the HOA's governance practices in compliance with the court's decision. This outcome invigorated Sarah and her supporters, as it validated their struggle against perceived injustice. Rather than merely quelling hostilities, it opened doors for future dialogue between residents and board members aimed at fostering a cooperative spirit within Willow Creek. As news spread throughout the community about the verdict, there was an air of cautious optimism. Many believed this was just the beginning of a healthier balance between individual homeowner rights and collective community governance, a legacy of change sparked by Sarah's courage to stand up for herself and her neighbors. Reflecting on the tumultuous journey that unfolded over the past months, Sarah felt a profound sense of growth and empowerment. The experience had taught her invaluable lessons about resilience, the importance of standing up for her rights, and the power of community. She realized that what began as a personal struggle had transformed into a collective movement, sparking significant change in Willow Creek. As she stood in her garden, where laughter once echoed during joyful gatherings, Sarah felt renewed appreciation for her home. It symbolized not only her sanctuary but also the spirit of perseverance that had emerged from adversity. Through the challenges faced and the alliances forged with her fellow residents, she recognized the strength that comes from unity. This realization motivated her to become more involved in community governance and advocate for an inclusive environment where every homeowner's voice could be heard. Moving forward, Sarah planned to establish regular meetings with her neighbors to discuss ongoing issues, ensuring open lines of communication with the HOA. She envisioned creating a residents' advisory panel that would collaborate with board members, fostering transparency and encouraging dialogue on proposed regulations. By actively engaging with the HOA, she aimed to establish a sense of partnership rather than conflict. Additionally, Sarah intended to share her experiences through community workshops focused on homeowner rights and effective communication strategies with HOAs. She believed that by empowering others with knowledge, they could collectively guard against future overreach and promote a culture of respect within Willow Creek. As she contemplated her next steps, Sarah felt a renewed sense of hope not just for herself but for all homeowners who sought a balance between individual expression and community standards. With determination in her heart, she was ready to lead the charge towards a harmonious and equitable living environment where every resident could feel secure and valued in their own home. As the dust settled from the intense confrontation between Sarah and the HOA, it became clear that the struggle was about more than just local governance. It was emblematic of a larger national conversation surrounding property rights versus HOA authority. Homeowners across the country often find themselves in similar battles, facing powerful associations that can impose strict regulations without adequate representation or consideration for individual rights. Sarah's journey highlighted the critical need for homeowners to understand their legal protections and actively engage in the governance processes that impact their lives. The court ruling in favor of Sarah and her coalition served as a reminder that while HOAs play a vital role in maintaining community standards, they must do so within the bounds of homeowner rights established by law. This balance is essential for fostering a community where property owners have the freedom to express themselves while still contributing to collective well-being. The ruling not only set a precedent for Willow Creek but also reverberated beyond its borders, inspiring homeowners in other communities to advocate for their rights, demand transparency, and challenge overreach. As Sarah looked towards the future, she recognized the importance of continuous dialogue, education, and advocacy in ensuring fair treatment for all homeowners. She understood that empowering her neighbors with knowledge about their rights could lead to a stronger, more unified community ready to resist oppressive governance. The lessons learned from this experience underscored an essential truth: when individuals stand together, they can reshape their environment and reclaim their autonomy. In conclusion, Sarah's fight against the HOA was not merely about one woman's determination to protect her home, it was a catalyst for broader change, one that urged homeowners everywhere to assert their rights and engage with their communities actively. As more individuals become aware of their power and responsibilities within homeowner associations, they will pave the way toward a future where both personal freedom and community standards coexist harmoniously.